Good evening and welcome to Quorum. I'm Wilson Stribling. It is March 2nd, exactly 1 month from the formal end of the 2011 legislative session. We thought this would be a good opportunity to recap the session so far and to consider the way forward. House and Senate lawmakers have been plowing through stacks of bills ahead of a series of deadlines. Tuesday marked the deadline for committees to report on general bills originating in the other house. Appropriation bills are among the deadline survivors, delivering funds to a wide range of state agencies and programs. But there's still a lot of negotiation due between the two bodies before the fiscal 2012 budget is complete. Other surviving bills include an Immigration Enforcement Act, a bill to punish people who host parties where minors drink alcohol, and a measure that would create an insurance database for state troopers to use during traffic stops. Other measures failed the deadline and will have to await another session. They include a charter school expansion measure, a statewide smoking ban, and a bill that would place rural water associations under the open meetings law. Beyond all this activity, there is the critical task of state redistricting. Every 10 years, Mississippi has to redraw its election district maps to conform to the latest census figures. Those figures show some big population swings in regions across our state. Areas such as the Memphis outskirts and the central counties of Madison and Rankin have grown tremendously in the last 10 years. Other regions, such as the Delta and the coastal counties, have seen big declines. Right now, a joint committee of House and Senate members is working on those new district maps that reflect these changes. The plans could be ready for approval by each chamber as early as next week. The U.S. Department of Justice must also approve the plan. That process will take at least 60 days, and redistricting must be complete by June 1st, the qualifying deadline for legislative elections. Otherwise, the state may have to hold back-to-back elections with different election maps. We asked two veteran Capitol reporters, Molly Parker and Bobby Harrison, what factors to watch for as the process unfolds.
In a perfect world, those things would be passed by both chambers, and that would be it. But there's some speculation that the plans might get caught up in partisan politics and might be drawn out. And as you know, they don't have much time. They have to get a plan approved in a short amount of time because it has to be submitted to the U.S. Justice Department for approval before elections later this year.
I think a lot of the lawmakers don't want to run twice. I think a lot of the Republicans and Democrats want to get together on a plan that would avoid two elections like they had in 1990. I think that there is some friction between some of the party leadership outside the legislature and some of the sort of new school Republican senators that are in charge now, that you see this sort of young, very active, very conservative political group coming up that may try to push for a more Republican map than the agreed upon map may look like. So I think where you're seeing the differences is not so much within the Republican and Democrat Party, but some differences within the Republican Party about how much they're willing to bend.
When the plan was passed in 2001, the current plan was passed in 2001, there were 39 African-American majority districts in the House and 12 in the Senate. Now, as it turns out now, because of population shifts, there's 40 African-American districts and majority districts in the House. So they can't, what they call retrogress, have fewer African-American majority districts when they redraw the lines than they do now. So but a lot of those African-American majority districts are in the Delta in areas where the state is losing population. So they have to be creative and look for other places where they can create African-American majority districts.
And that sets the stage for tonight's edition of Quorum. Here to discuss these issues and more tonight, Hob Bryan is a Democratic senator representing Itawamba, Lee, and Monroe counties. He chairs the Senate Public Health and Welfare Committee, and he is a member of the Joint Redistricting Committee. From the House, Representative Jim Evans is a Democrat from Hinds County. He is the chairman of the House Constitution Committee. Also, Representative John Mayo is here. The Democrat represents Coahoma, DeSoto, and Tunica counties, and he chairs the House Conservation and Water Resources Committee. Gentlemen, we thank you all for being here this evening. Thank you. Of course, we want you to join the conversation as well. Our toll-free phone line is open. Dial 1-877-405-5247 with your questions for our guests. Again, it's 1-877-405-5247. You can also email your questions to quorum@mpbonline.org. And we'll get to as many of those as our time allows. You can also join the discussion on Twitter. Just add the hashtag Quorum to your comment and follow us at twitter.com/ MPB Online. And I'd like to kick off our discussion this evening with the redistricting process. Senator Bryan, you're on that committee. What can you tell us about the process at this point?
Well, I think that the most important group to remember in the process is the 3 million people in the state who need to have legislative districts and need to have a 4-year election in November. There had been, in the early part of the process, discussion about political parties trying to do in each other and so on and so forth. I've not seen any final plan, but it's my understanding that both the House plan, which Representative Reynolds has prepared, and the Senate plan that Senator Burton has prepared are fair to both parties. They're fair to incumbents, and as I say, fair to the people of the state. They comply, I understand, with the Voting Rights Act. They're extremely likely to be pre-cleared, and if we could just move ahead and take care of those plans, we could be well on the way to having elections for 4 years. It's my understanding that the House plan is going to be brought before the joint committee tomorrow. The way this works is there's a joint redistricting committee with House and Senate members. The House has completed their plan. They're ready to go, and we're going to meet tomorrow to consider the House plan, which I'm sure will be approved by the joint committee. Then, of course, later it would go to the legislature and have to go through the legislative process. But time is very short. The Justice Department has 60 days rather, to decide whether to pre-clear the plan or not. The qualifying deadline is June 1st. That's less than 3 months away. 60 days is 2 months. The attorneys need some amount of time to prepare the pre-clearance submission because it ain't just a fill-in-the-blanks form. It's volumes and volumes of information they have to send to the Justice Department. That all takes time. The legislature's got to act on this. Time is very, very short. We need to get to work on this. We need to pass these plans so that we can have elections for 4 years and the 3 million people of the state can find out what the legislative districts are.
A lot of issues to consider in this process, and we'll try to isolate each one as we move along here tonight. But which areas of our state saw the greatest gains in population? We touched on this a little bit at the beginning, and which had the biggest declines?
Well, for the second census in a row, the growth that had the most impact on the process is in DeSoto County. There are other parts of the state that are growing, such as Rankin County, Madison County, for example, but they're in the middle of the state. And you can get to Madison County and get to Rankin County in a lot of different ways. But when there's growth in DeSoto County, you just can't run a district into Tennessee, and you can't run a district into Arkansas, so your options are more limited in DeSoto County. 10 years ago, we moved either a district, or I like to say half a district, because that's about what it worked out to DeSoto County. This time, DeSoto County has enough population for 8/10 of a new district. So some district is just about going to have to be moved to DeSoto County, and that's a big deal for the Senate plan. Other than that, generally, the Delta lost population, and the plans that I've seen deal with that by having the Delta districts just drift west with the population.
Representative Evans, you represent a district that...
drift east, I'm sorry.
Sure, okay.
They can't drift west. I just said you can't send a district to Arkansas.
We can't cross the river. That's true. That's true. Another area, we talked about the Delta, we talked about the coast. You represent Hinds County, the surrounding area, which is one of the areas that lost, I believe, 2,800 residents, a 12% drop. Have you seen your new proposed district lines, and are you satisfied with them?
I have seen them, Ken, and you know, the question becomes, can you win in them? But are you satisfied with them? They are two different questions. I've always looked at this as there's a protective class established by the court, and then there are continuous and contiguous, and then there's commonality of interest, which is what the Justice Department set up. And I carefully look at that, and I'm not at that conclusion yet that we meet all those guidelines. So I'm not quite there yet.
So each district, as it's drawn, should meet those criteria.
Absolutely.
And you're not satisfied fully that that's
it may have not been. I have not examined them all to that point. So, but justice will, and for the public out there, we always say then justice will prove it. I want the public to understand why justice is in this process is because there's a protective class. and we have to deal with that first, and then there are those other criteria that they set out. And I think the commonality of interest is one a lot of time we forget, so I'm examining it for that for myself.
All as the clock continues to tick.
Absolutely.
Representative Mayo, you're sort of the flip side. You represented a district that grew by 6,800 people, almost 31%, North Mississippi?
All of it in DeSoto County.
Wow. We hear about the growth up there. It's often called a suburb of Memphis. A lot of the folks who live...
No, let me correct you. Memphis is a suburb of DeSoto County.
Forgive me, of course.
Okay, that's okay.
It's considered part of the greater Memphis area, I guess, which is a lot of folks are discovering that they'd rather live in Mississippi, even if they live or do some business in Tennessee, in the Memphis area. What does redistricting mean for your district and for that part of North Mississippi?
Actually, I've lost some area I had in my home county, gained some area, but I've gained some area in DeSoto County. And I'm pretty well satisfied. I'm disappointed I lost 2 areas in Coahoma County that I thought I've represented well, but I'm satisfied. I think everybody in the House has a winnable district, and I don't think anybody, quote, got a knife stabbed in their back. I think everybody's fairly well satisfied. I may add one thing. You can go across the river, because in 2 counties I represent, Coahoma County and Tunica County. Mississippi is actually on the west side of the river in Arkansas, in both of those counties.
Is that because the way the river has changed course over the years?
That's correct. And there's significant land that both counties have, or the state has, that are in Arkansas.
So, Senator Bryan, you're wrong.
But he knows which way is east and which way is west. So, you know, there's
Gamble on the other side of the river.
Representative Mayo used an interesting term, a winnable district. And I think the thing that's important to remember is the districts don't belong to the folks that happen to be elected from them at any given moment. The districts belong to the voters and to the people. I've felt like, and I think the Senate has felt like over the years, that insofar as you can, if an incumbent is seeking re-election, that incumbent should be in a district in which the incumbent can win, that the incumbent is not put into a district where he or she is defeated, not because the voters wish to do that, because of legislative intrigue.
Hob makes a good point.
And that's one of the goals that I know Senator Burton has worked for, and it's been a goal that the Senate's used forever. I will tell you, 8 years ago, when a district moved to DeSoto County, you can't move a district without getting rid of another district. And there was a senator whose district disappeared 8 years ago, and it was my duty to go explain this, and it was very unpleasant and all. But that came about because of population shifts, not because of any intent.
One will disappear in Hinds County this year.
I was about to ask, are we facing losing any other districts?
Absolutely. We will lose one district. According to our plan, one seat is collapsed in South Jackson.
And that's because of population changes.
Things were made a bit easier in the House because there's at least 7 members who have already publicly said they're not coming back for another term. So that's 7 districts that you can move around, and I think that's what we've done.
Well, we talked a little bit about the Justice Department oversight of this entire process. Lieutenant Governor Phil Bryant said just today that he felt offended that federal authorities still do have to approve Mississippi's redistricting effort. We're among several states that still require that Justice Department oversight after the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Senator Bryan, do you think we still need that federal oversight for this process?
Well, I was disappointed that the Lieutenant Governor made that statement. We have to comply with federal law. The Voting Rights Act has been tested in court. It's been ruled constitutional by the United States Supreme Court. And ironically, the particular features of the Voting Rights Act we're dealing with were overwhelmingly supported by Republicans when the Voting Rights Act was up for renewal, because they felt the provisions of the Voting Rights Act helped the Republicans. But be that as it may, it's the law. We need to be focusing on getting a plan that complies with the law, submitting it to the Justice Department, and putting our efforts toward getting in a situation where we can have elections for 4 years, which is what the voters expect and what the voters have a right to expect. And we don't need to have a situation that we had previously where we run in 2011 and then turn right around again and have to run under different districts in 2012. I wish the Lieutenant Governor would focus more on trying to get us a plan that complies with the Voting Rights Act, and I just think it's the wrong time to be making statements like that.
Gentlemen, do you think we still need the Justice Department oversight?
Absolutely. I think the Lieutenant Governor makes it clear that we need it. He's part of the reason why we need it. You know,
what do you mean?
Because without any evidence or any justification, he's making this conclusion, and folks out there will believe him. We got on the ballot a issue about voter ID, and we don't have any fraud reported in the last 20 years. So the problem with it, yes, we need it because of the action that they are taking in this process and every other process. I got a bill that came from the Senate, House Bill 2224, that would, if it passed the House and was signed, it would have abolished the 10th Amendment. Ridiculous. Some in my community said would have reestablished this Sovereignty Commission. And I don't think anybody with these types of things going on is thinking that this is the time to take it away in this climate in Mississippi. I mean, this is one of the worst climates I've seen. A fellow that's 60 years old. I've seen a lot of climates, but we're operating right now in one of the worst climates that I've ever been involved with.
Politically, racially, what do you mean?
Socially, you know, I really didn't want to get into the subject, but when you look at the immigrant bashing, the gay bashing, the every kind of bashing, then everybody looking for tax cuts for the rich and the heck with the poor. I think in this class we're protected for that very reason why you have the Justice Department involved in the first place, was to protect the class. And even though I think the class now that need protected is probably broader than just African Americans, there's other classes as well. So absolutely, you need the Justice Department's oversight at this point. We should not. It's shameful that in 2011 we as citizens in Mississippi still need it. But you know, there's a force that interested in taking it back and moving it back. So, and I see that force together every day, and it's not just, I know you're going to get to this later, but not just in Wisconsin. We've never had those rights that they're fighting to preserve, but they still want to take back some of what we have. So absolutely you need it.
I think in an election year, those comments are good political speak. But having said that, at some point when it's not a hot issue topic, I think we need to look at, is Mississippi doing right by its voting laws and its election laws, and perhaps have some kind of study or research. What can we do better? But if we're doing right, maybe we ought to come out, but not during an election year. I mean, that gets everybody stirred up, and you know, you got both sides to it. But at some point, when there's not an election and there's not redistricting, then at some point we probably need to look, are we doing right?
And others have come out. The city of Jackson had come out from under some of the protection that they were police hiring, and others, they're out from under it. Some say it's not good, some say bad, but they have demonstrated enough fairness to come out.
You're seeing a lot of school districts which have been under federal review are also coming out, because their schools are fully integrated now, and the school boards now are, in some cases, are able to run their own schools without having to get Justice Department approval for what they're doing.
Well, it's not really the same thing if there is a lawsuit and a court order applying to specific parties in a specific case. Absolutely. And a federal statute that's on the books that applies nationwide. There are trigger mechanisms for whether you're in the under the Voting Rights Act or not, but New York City and other places are also under the Voting Rights Act. Whether the act is a good or a bad idea is beside the point. It's there. We've got to comply with the Voting Rights Act to get our legislative lines pre-cleared. We need to be focusing on that and not this side issue.
All right, let's move on to something else that the Lieutenant Governor said. That he said the Senate should have some input on the House's new district map, and that drew some negative response from the Speaker, Billy McCoy. Mr. Mayo, what do you think of that?
He'll draw a negative response from me, too. I think there's a gentleman's agreement. You know, we'll approve their districts. They know best what's good for the Senate, and I think we know best what's good for the House. And he'll draw the same negative comments that the Speaker may have made from me.
Mr. Evans?
Absolutely the same, and probably more. I don't know the intensity of the speaker's response, but it's absolutely meddling where he has no business unless he wants us meddling in the Senate. And we don't want to be meddling in the Senate because we understand how ours should go, and I believe that they understand theirs, and I'm certain that Senator Bryan does. So why would we we didn't make no attempt to get in theirs.
I see.
I think the question is whether the plans are fair. And had the House produced a gerrymander which was unfair to Republicans, I can understand fighting back with whatever you had if the plan was unfair. I don't hear anybody anywhere suggesting that the House plan is unfair. I haven't seen the House plan, but every person I've talked to, everyone who's seen his district keeps saying over and over again, this appears to be a fair plan, fair to Democrats, fair to Republicans, and as I say, fair to the 3 million people in the state. And of course we'll know for sure tomorrow because the House is ready to go with their plan, and it'll be made public tomorrow. And I think once the plan is made public, there's just no reason at all for the Senate not to approve it.
All right, let's go to the phone lines now. We have a question from David calling from Meridian. David, go ahead with your question, please.
Hello, gentlemen. How are you doing tonight? How will this redistricting affect the election of the next Speaker of the House of Representatives? And also, what kind of situation is the state retirement system in? And are you going to ask state employees to give up anything like they're doing in Wisconsin? And could Mississippi become another Wisconsin? And I'll hang up and thank you very much.
Let's start with the Speaker of the House question, gentlemen.
You know, every election every 4 years affect who's the Speaker of the House going to be, whoever gets the majority in that particular election. And you know, so I don't think it's any different this year. The same effect that'll happen every time. But now, as far as the Wisconsin situation, the workers and the voters of Mississippi don't have any of those protections that they have in Madison, Wisconsin, for its collective bargaining. Not even teachers. There's no collective bargaining in Mississippi. But as far as the benefits, our state employees been giving up every year throughout this recession, higher co-payments and insurance. It's some ridiculous number now. I mean, it's almost $1,000, I believe. I'm not certain, but it's headed in that direction, if not there. So our state employees have been giving and giving and giving. And if they had what they have in Wisconsin, they'd be awfully in better shape. They might be approaching the middle class.
All right, let's move to the budget now. Education funding seems to be a sticking point there. The House wants to appropriate a little over $2 billion for the Mississippi Adequate Education Program, MAEP. The Senate is proposing a bit less. Senator Bryan, you're on the Education Committee. Can you explain the difference there?
Well, first of all, the previous caller asked about the retirement system. The short answer is the retirement system's in good shape. It's like the economy. Things don't look good right now on paper, but the system's well funded. There's enough money there to pay benefits to retirees. The legislature understands its responsibility to fund the system. We have funded the system. Indeed, we've overfunded the system in some years, according to this actuary they have. And the system is not in the shape that some systems in other states are. It's a good system. It's in good shape, and we just need to leave it alone for a while. He asked about this election and the Speaker. The Speaker's election is chosen by who wins the House seats, and is where the Republicans or the Democrats get the most House members and the most Senate members. Under the plan that I understand the Senate has, and under the plan I understand the House has, that decision is going to be made by the voters in November of this year. Neither plan is a partisan gerrymander, and strangely enough, we're going to have an election, and that's how we're going to find out who's going to be in charge of state government. Generally speaking, I disagree with the Senate leadership on funding of public education. I think, first of all, we need to be complying with the law and fully funding that Mississippi Adequate Education Act. We're not even close to doing that. That's an enormous tragedy. The schools got some money from the federal government to help tide them over last spring, and it was paid for in the following fashion. Number one, there was on the books a provision for extended food stamps. The Congress reduced the money for food stamps. There were some loopholes that allowed international corporations not to pay their fair share of the United States income tax. The proposal closed those loopholes, reduced the money for food stamps, and took that same amount of money and sent it to the public schools. It was revenue neutral. It had no impact on the deficit, and it meant several $1 million to DeSoto County, which has got one of the most thriving school districts in the state. The governor's response was, first of all, that he thought it was a bad idea. He didn't want the money. I mean, it's difficult for me to imagine that it's better to spend money on tax breaks for international corporations and on food stamps than it is to spend money educating the children in Mississippi, including places like DeSoto County, which we seem to be talking about a lot tonight. But then when the money got to the schools, now the governor's position is, okay, we should reduce your state appropriation because you got this money. It's just beyond me. And our schools are struggling. Teachers are being laid off. We have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of fewer teachers than we had when the economic crisis started. And enough is enough. We need to at least maintain the funding that the schools are getting.
Governor Barbour has proposed that the school districts should be prepared to utilize some of their own reserves to offset some of the pain from the budget cuts. What do you think of that?
I hope that as soon as Governor Barbour's paycheck is deposited into his checking account, and before he's written any checks for the month, someone comes and sees his bank deposit on that day and says the governor's got all this money in the bank. Because that's exactly what the governor's doing when it comes to the schools. They have money that has come in that is obligated for expenses later on in the fiscal year. He wishes to take a snapshot when the deposit has been made, but before the checks have been written, and claim that the schools have all this money. Trust me, the schools have been underfunded. The governor has supported underfunding the schools, and I just can't imagine that he wants to underfund them even more.
Can I follow up on that?
Certainly.
There's a dichotomy here. The governor does not want to spend, quote, the state's rainy day money, but he wants the school districts to spend, quote, their rainy day money, which was what Hob called, it's their reserve fund. It's their reserve fund to carry them over to another year. It's their reserve fund to build a new building that's planned for. If the governor forces them to do that, they just have to go and raise taxes to either renovate buildings or build buildings. And I can't understand how he doesn't want us to spend our money, but he wants the local school districts to spend theirs. It doesn't make sense. And I do want to make one remark. If the Republicans' only mantra during this next election is fire McCoy, I hope the voters of this state are not completely gullible. There are issues like underfunding education, underfunding mental health, underfunding Medicaid that are far more important than who's the next speaker. And I would hope that the voters of the state face the candidates running for office and forget about this fire someone mantra that they run on and ask about those three issues. What are you going to do to fund education? And in particular, what are you going to do to fund mental health?
All right, let's go to the phone lines now. We have a caller, Ray from Pascagoula, with a question. Ray, go ahead with your question, please, sir.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon. I want to say hi to the gentleman and take this opportunity to be part of this wonderful program. First of all, I think many of the issues that you guys have spoke is down here in the ground. Many of us in the boondocks, as we call them, are struggling to understand why we are cutting education, why we struggled for so many years to raise those scores up, and I was kind of proud of that in many ways. And now when we are contemplating all these cuts, is really very difficult to grasp. We are still trying to deal with the issue of insurance, and many people are moving away from this area because they basically cannot afford that. But one of the issues that I feel is very important for Mississippi right now, and in a humble way, is mental health. and access to mental health. I believe that many people have not recuperated, and we lost a lot of citizens after the effects of the storm that we had. And I don't know if we prepare for another one, but I just want to thank the gentleman for speaking for a lot of people. I think the issues are real, and I want to thank you for the opportunity to add my 2 cents. To Mr. Evans, thank you for building coalitions and for being so open. To the other gentleman for representing the view that we are in trouble and we need to pray for our state and our nation to be more unified in the issues that affect real people. Thank you.
Thank you for your call, Ray. He brings up some issues that are unique in some ways to the folks on the coast. He mentioned insurance, mental health, and the effects that people are still feeling from Hurricane Katrina. And it was preaching to the choir a bit on education and some of the things we've been talking about.
Absolutely, and I want to thank the gentleman for calling, and I really understand the spirit of where he's coming from. I don't think that mental health part is limited just to the coast, because we make all these sheriffs mental health wardens how we do mental health. So I think that's a statewide problem that we ought to deal with. The other peculiar aspects of it that relate to the hurricane, the oil spill, and complete economic and financial collapse, all that's contributed to it. But ours was in horrible shape to begin with, so we compound a problem on top of what was already an emergency, and we've yet to deal with that in a proper manner. And it's all tied up in how we develop our state. Part of the reason the population is shifting east away from the river is because we have never dealt with the river as the economic tool that it ought to be. And we got the mighty Mississippi River there, and we ought to be aggressively creating things with high employment intensity. We got a port at Natchez. One of the biggest problems, not used hardly at all, but we got container ships coming in from all over the world that we know are not checked and they're not secure. We got China and other places trying to bring in forestry. That's one of the great areas of Mississippi we miss so much, and it troubles me when I see us waste away the opportunity along the river, waste the resources like forestry and others, where, I'm going to be honest with you, folks like the Koch brothers are manipulating our own forestry market right here in Mississippi. And we're not dealing with getting the value of our resources and creating opportunity for our people. Other folks are coming in, and these materials, just as in the old days, is with cotton right on through the day, it's being manufactured and processed somewhere else. And as a result, our people leave to go where those jobs are, and our river continues to decay.
Representative Mayo, back to the coast. Are we still feeling economic effects from the oil spill in particular? Absolutely, and we will for several more years. As chair of the Conservation Committee, I've made more trips to the coast as a flatlander this past spring, summer, and fall than I've made in 57 years of living in Mississippi. The coast, 2010 was supposed to be a recovery year for the coast from Katrina. They had built up, starting to build up their tourism trade, and then the oil spill hit, and it was gone. They lost fishing rodeos, restaurants closed, people wouldn't eat Gulf seafood, and it was just devastating to the coast. Now, I understand that in terms of tourism dollars, the coast provides about 50% of the tourism dollars to Mississippi. That money disappeared this summer, and whether or not or how long it will take to come back is the $64,000 question. Will it come back? Will people, the coast, Louisiana, Mississippi, provide 54% of all the seafood eaten in the United States? That disappeared literally overnight. How long is it going to take to come back? And Mississippi's economy is definitely impacted by that oil spill. Now, we're putting together all kinds of information as if we were going to court, and we're doing it to get BP to reimburse the state, its losses. And they're gathering the information. They're not going to court yet, but they're gathering in the information as if we were going to court to sue them. When you say they, you're referring to? DEQ, DMR, several of the state agencies, even the governor's office, to present a bill to BP. And then
hopefully they'll pay it. If they don't, I think we ought to sue the Hades out of them.
Out of BP.
Absolutely.
Well, Mississippi is not alone in its budget problems. A dispute over state employee benefits and collective bargaining rights has erupted into big protests outside the Wisconsin legislature, as we have discussed. Union members in Mississippi rallied this week in support of their Wisconsin counterparts. Mississippi unions don't have collective bargaining rights, and activists say that is one reason why state workers often become scapegoats in budgeting battles. They're voicing their concern about the fate of Mississippi state employees as lawmakers work with tighter and tighter budgets. So, Representative Mayo, do you expect to see more layoffs in state government as a result of budget cuts?
I think this budget, Hob know more about it than myself. I think this budget year we have done everything to maintain the employment level, the funding level of education if we're able to adopt the House budget. I don't see massive layoffs. I think you might see attrition type layoffs, but from what I'm hearing, there's no plans to literally lay off anybody.
Senator Bryan?
There's clearly enough money available to have a budget this year that was the same size last year's budget was in general terms.
So no layoffs likely?
There should not be, but I think you should understand that last year we were operating at an unusually low level, and this year we will continue to operate at an unusually low level, but there's no reason to go below where we were last year. You said the caller was preaching to the choir.
About education.
Well, there's nothing wrong with that. The choir needs to hear a good sermon every now and then. That's okay.
But just saying, you all were in agreement with his concerns about education.
We could hear sermons like that if someone else wants to call.
We can also agree that the Senator is correct. There may be layoffs, but it won't be because of budget. There will be budget. There's enough money for us to operate at the same level, but now there may be some other reason why somebody might want to lay some folks off, but it won't be because of money.
And we could all use a good sermon from time to time. We have another caller on the line. Rob from Tupelo. Rob, go ahead with your question, please.
Well, yes, sir. I mean, the first thing I'd like to remind is these guys are talking about the local money and the state money. Please remember that is my money. And if we need better schools at the local level, then let the local government come to me to where I can vote on it locally. The other thing I'd like to say, we keep talking about education funding and adequate education funding. I'm almost positive that we spend more on education today than we did when I was a child and coming through the system, but yet I continue to see the level of education decline. And I would like for somebody somewhere to cite a study, any study that shows dollars spent equals education gains. And I have never heard anybody say it, and I'm tired of people talking about money is the key to education. That is not the only key, and I'd like to listen to your comments.
I tell you, my desk mate is a retired teacher. Now, I don't know when the caller went to school, but I know when my desk mate was teaching, he was getting paid $7,000 a year. We can't pay a teacher $7,000 a year like might have happened when the caller went to school. Things cost. I mean, equipment. You know, the people who sell us books, who sell us computers, who sell us classroom materials, they're not cutting their prices. And when they don't cut their prices, we got to raise our revenue. I mean, it's just a fact. If all the people who sold schools, their bricks, their mortar, their computers, their Wi-Fi lines, all that stuff, if they would cut their budgets, cut their cost in half, we could cut the budget in half. But that's not happening.
Well, what about the money? Because the caller might argue, is the money that's being spent already on education, whether it's fully funding MAP or not, is it being spent wisely? There's often the argument that we have too many school districts, that we have too much administration, and if we cut out some of that, then the money would get to the kids, and maybe putting more money into education would make more sense.
Well, first of all, the caller's exactly right when he says the money we're talking about is taxpayers' money and it belongs to the taxpayers, and he's right, and there's not any excuse for wasting $1 of taxpayers' money at any level, and it doesn't matter if we're having good times or bad times. I certainly take it seriously when we're spending taxpayers' money, and I think other people do. The caller's exactly right about that. If you think back about what schools were like 50 years ago, when it was cheaper, 50 years ago there were large numbers of dropouts, and 50 years ago there were jobs for dropouts. There were a large number of jobs that required manual labor, a large number of jobs that did not require a high school education, and you could drop out of school or not go to high school and get a job and make it. That's not the world we live in now. Most jobs require not merely a high school education, but training beyond that. And there now is the task of educating everybody. You can't take 50% of the students and not worry with educating them and save the cost of doing that. And you've got to educate everybody today. So that is one major difference that people talk about how the way things used to be. I think sometimes tend to forget. Secondly, Mississippi spends less money than any other state in the union. I remember the school superintendent saying to me, you know, folks say you can't solve education by throwing money at it. How do we know? We've never tried that. We've tried everything else. Why don't we try that a while and see if it works?
And the thing.
But the funding level for education, even at the full funding level of the adequate education program, which we're not funding, is so low compared to other states that we're not spending too much money in Mississippi.
And you know, Senator Bryan said and made it very clear, we've never tried throwing money at education, but our citizens believe that we have. And that's what the caller is alluding to. That's when you're on the bottom, not only do you have to spend every dime wisely, but you got to spend every dime better than the other folk, don't you remain on the bottom. So in order to catch up, and I think that's where we are, but we clearly got to understand that we have never made the commitment to have the excellence in education. We've talked about it. We passed best bills and other bills saying we have, but we've never gone the full route at doing that. And until you do something that will motivate the people that this time it's going to be done, we're going to go to level 5 and a level whatever the top level is with our education and make that commitment. But we can't assume that we're doing something. That's what hurts us so bad. We think that we are spending more than most states, but we're spending less than any state.
In answer to another part of the caller's question about, he was alluding to accountability. Over the last 3 years, the legislature, working with Dr. Burnham, the superintendent of education, we are making it easier to remove even elected school boards and superintendents when their schools don't perform, and allow the state to take over that district to get the achievement levels up. And the legislature is literally doing what it can to remove the leaders of non-performing school districts, and that's been a bloodbath to do that. But we've done it.
Or any other impediment to excellence. I mean, we understand that we are a nation that if we don't lead in education, we're not going to lead in innovations, and we're not going to lead in this century. So we understand how critically important that is. That's why I don't want us to get to fighting education. One side believing we're spending too much, one side believing we're spending too little. Let's look at the numbers. Senator Bryan is absolutely right. We have never made the investment at the same level that our neighboring states have.
When the caller says money is not the complete answer, he's exactly right. The way I say it is adequate money will not guarantee a successful school district. Inadequate money will just about guarantee an unsuccessful school district. So there's the amount of money you actually have to operate a district. But beyond that, affluence breeds affluence. Poverty breeds poverty. If you're in an affluent area, generally speaking, you're going to have good schools. If you're in an economically depressed area, generally speaking, your schools are going to be less successful. Mississippi is not going to make it unless we all get there together, and it is a constant challenge to find how you recruit teachers and get good teachers to go live and teach in economically deprived areas, how you get good principals who are really the key to much of the success of schools. It's an ongoing challenge.
All right, we learned this week that last month's state revenues were 2% less than what we'd expected. Representative Evans, are you concerned?
February was a short month.
What, by 2 days, 48 hours?
I don't know.
3:30.
Sounded good.
Are you all concerned, though, that the state's economy is not recovering as well as hoped? Representative Evans, let's start with you.
We're always concerned that it's not recovering as well, but there's going to be peaks and valleys. You know, on top of February being a slow month, you don't have any of the big sales items, the big holidays that you have in other months. So there's a lot of reasons why February is always lower. I want to understand that. February is always lower unless there's some other natural disaster that causes us to be digging out for money and spending money. So it's consistent with the flow, and I believe that it's going to increase. I'm convinced that the economy is moving along, not at the pace that it should, but we had a long ways to come back from. And you know, in Mississippi, we always lag behind. So this is not necessarily a lag that only we are going through. It's just the fact that February is a tough month for sales tax.
So no need for serious concern.
No need to panic whatsoever.
Well, even though we were short in February, as I say, it's a short month. I like that line. If you look at the year as a whole, we're about 30, 40, I forget, tens of millions of dollars ahead of the estimate. So if you look at the year, if you look at the trends are good. If March is short and April short, then you've got reason for concern, but you tend to look at the long trends.
Well, Senator, you've expressed concern about tax credits being approved by the Senate Finance Committee. What exactly are those credits for, and why are you opposed to them?
Well, I'm not opposed to the credits. I just think that they need to be observed, or we need to keep an eye on them. But this is the program that I think you're talking about. There's a tax credit for those who work on historic buildings. If you spend $10 million on a building, you get a $3 million tax credit from the state. That essentially is a $3 million IOU from the state. It's the same thing as though the state had given you a $3 million appropriation out of the general fund. So the individual that spent $10 million on the building and has the $10 million building also has $3 million to use to offset taxes. Our maximum tax rate is 5%. So that would require $60 million worth of income to eat up that amount. Because the $60 million, not many people have that much income, the tax credits are sold. But the market is such, so I understand that a $1 tax credit, which costs the taxpayer $1, costs the general fund $1, is sold on the open market for something like 30 or 35 cents. So in order to, as they say, encourage someone to improve a historic building, the state is giving the individual something that's worth $1, which the individual then sells for 35 cents. The individual only gets 35 cents out of the dollar, and the middleman who's acting as a agent to buy and sell these credits is getting something like 65 cents of that dollar. Members of the committee started remarking that they felt they were in the wrong business. This was a good business to get in. What I've suggested is that we need to be more careful about how we're handling out the credits and at least have a cap on them. Right now there is no cap at all. There's no such thing as an appropriations bill in an unlimited amount. But essentially that's what we've done with allowing these tax credits to exist in unlimited amounts. And a tax credit is money out of the Treasury just like an appropriation is. And I just think we need to get a hand on it, we need to go slowly, and we need to have some sort of cap, and we need to analyze the program to see how successful it's being. There's some variations on the program, by the way, that I think might improve it.
And to Senator, I agree with you wholeheartedly in your interpretation of you got it all down, but I want the public to also understand who benefits from these tax breaks. This is a gift to the wealthy. I mean, when you're talking these tax rates, no middle class and poor folks going to be taking advantage of any of these tax breaks. So my problem with it is, on top of all of that is, it's another throwaway without restraint. So you talk about with no limits on it. I mean, there are some folks that can really take this thing out. So it's troubling, but it's also reason for the public to be concerned because therein lies a lot of our budget problem.
I'd like to give a flip side. I agree with what Hob said about caps, and there should be. But you take Clarksdale, where there's a lot of vacant buildings, and a lot of them are historic buildings. There's two I can think of right now. One hotel that's a historic building, and another one that was, quote, a high rise in its time, all of 10 floors, I believe. When those come online, those will be property tax and sales tax that the local government will realize. And while the state loses money, and we're pushing an awful lot down to local government, while the state does lose money, as Hob says, the local governments, the cities and the counties, will realize an increase in property values and will also realize a sales tax generated by the revenues that those buildings ought to be in when they come online.
So a sacrifice on the state level to benefit on the local level.
Those go ahead, Hob. Those buildings right now are an eyesore. And I know of two, though, that are under plans for being renovated. And I mean, when they're done, they're going to be a jewel for the downtown area.
But we have another program that came up in the Finance Committee where if you're going to build or renovate a hotel, you can get another tax break where the sales tax that's collected there doesn't go to the city and it doesn't go to the state. It goes in a pot and it goes right back to you. My concern is that all of these programs build on each other. They're all costing the state tens and tens of millions of dollars in revenue, and they're out there and they're unlimited. I think we need to be careful and see if they're targeted and see if we're getting how much bang for the buck. I would be extremely interested in trying to get the Alcazar Hotel renovated and open in Clarksdale.
Knowing it, Hob. Thank you.
It's a wonderful, Clarksdale's a wonderful town, and the Alcazar Hotel has great potential. It could be the alluvion of Clarksdale. And I certainly support the state participating in that, but I don't want the state to do something which puts $1 million into the renovation of the Alcazar Hotel and costs the state $3 million to do it. That ain't good business.
I think you and I are going to go to conference on a wastewater bill. I do not look forward to negotiating with you.
All right, well, we've talked a lot tonight about the redistricting process that's underway now. That leads us directly into Mississippi's elections in November. Legislative Democrats enter the campaign with dwindling numbers. Governor Barber was at GOP headquarters in Jackson last week as Republicans welcomed a new member. He is Senator Ezell Lee, representing Harrison, Jackson, Pearl River, and Stone counties. Lee was first elected to the House as a Democrat in 1987, but this year he's among several former legislative Democrats seeking re-election as Republicans. Now, Lee's conversion makes him the 27th Senate Republican, giving his new party firm control of that body. So we turn now to our Senate Democrat Hob Bryan to ask, are you worried that the November elections, or what the November elections might mean for your party's position in the next legislature?
Back to the Alcazar Hotel. It's a wonderful building, and I'm interested in doing everything I can.
But will there be fewer Democrats staying there?
I will take collections to get the Alcazar Hotel going.
What's the future of legislative Democrats?
This is what happened 4 years ago. There were a number of Democrats. I mean, there were several Democrats that switched parties, and I think 4 years ago the Republicans had a 27-member members of the state Senate. And then we had elections 4 years ago, and some of those party switchers got defeated at the polls, and they were replaced by Democrats. I think the Democrats picked up 3 seats in the state Senate last year and lost 1 back. So we had a net gain of 2 seats 4 years ago. And now we seem to have this trend of people switching parties continuing. We'll have elections and see how successful they come out. I think the Democratic Party, first of all, we may not have fielded candidates for some of the statewide offices, but there are plenty of Democrats running or will be running for the legislature as soon as we get these maps drawn and adopted so people can have districts to run in. There are plenty of Democrats running for sheriff, supervisor, all sorts of offices at the county level. County offices in Mississippi are overwhelmingly held by Democrats. I think we've done a very bad job of getting our message out. We need to do a better job of that. But as far as what's going to happen, as I keep saying, it's really up to the voters, and that's why we have elections.
And the voters have been clear that party switches, especially in the middle of a term, is a deceiving situation, and quite frankly, I believe that most of them will continue to be defeated as they have in previous years.
I would say this, regardless of whether people who are elected are Republicans or Democrats, I think that the people as a whole expect whoever gets elected to work together. I think the people are fed up with partisanship, and they don't want to be in a situation where one party spends all its time picking at the other and tearing it down. I'm a Democrat, and I'm proud to be a Democrat, but I don't think the Democrats are right about everything, and I don't think the Republicans are wrong about everything, and most everybody I know feels that same way. Whoever wins these elections, we need to work together, and we don't need to set up to have partisan war for 4 solid years.
Well, doesn't it concern you, though, that Democrats have entered the race, statewide races, which you mentioned, governor, attorney general, and ag commissioner? Those are the only statewide elections where Democrats will be posing a challenge this year. Isn't that a concern to you?
It takes money to run for a statewide office, and the pot is not overflowing. And I think that keeps a lot of people out. I mean, the governor's race this year will probably spend $7 to $8 million conservatively to become governor. That's a heck of a lot of money.
And you know what Will Rogers said? I'm not a member of any organized political party. I'm a Democrat. He was right then, and he's right now. We don't do a good job at organization, but our heart's in the right place, and we tend to come out okay in the elections.
We'll leave it at that. That is all the time we have for tonight. I'd like to thank our guests. We also thank you for joining our discussion tonight. We will soon have this edition of Quorum available for viewing online at mpbonline.org. Quorum returns next Wednesday at 7 with more coverage of Legislature 2011 and the state's budget crisis. I'm Wilson Stribling. Good night.